Thank you for the warm introduction, Corey. And along with the Liturgy Committee, I want to thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. I've titled my share, Who is My Neighbor? Won't you be my neighbor? If I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? Then the Good Samaritan came by and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? This man, this human being, is my neighbor. This human being is our neighbor. Our task tonight is to examine if it is wise to consider all human beings our neighbor, and if it is foolish to invite others to assume that we want them to be our neighbor. My mom rarely cried. I can remember only 2 occasions seeing her cry in my life. The first time I saw her cry was in April 1968. I was barely 7 years old. She clutched her stomach and sobbed at the breaking news on TV that Dr. Martin Luther King had been shot at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis. She was pacing up and down the hallway, didn't have words, was in shock. Though I did not have the language or comprehension at that age to understand, I knew that something very important and very sad had happened. I never met Dr. Martin Luther King, but I grew up with the image of him in my home. As a kid, we grew up with a photo of white Jesus, John F. Kennedy, and Dr. King on the living room wall. These were the central icons and heroes in our family. These were the people who inspired us and nourished us. They gave us hope and guided how we related to each other and how we wanted our household to be. These framed photographs were also in my grandmother's home and in my auntie's homes. These were our heroes. Though we were living in New Jersey, all of the relatives in different states had the same 3 images in their living rooms, not hidden in back bedrooms. My grandfather, John Jones, was clear that it was our job to leave things better than we found them. And he always gave examples. He always gave us the example of leaving things better. If a neighbor was going through a hard time, he would bag fruits and vegetables from his garden and take them over. He knew who his neighbor was. My mom had made a life dedicated to community service as a social worker. She continued in her father's example that we give what we have. When we lived in Portsmouth, Virginia, my mom organized moms to clean up the playground of needles during a time when there was heavy drug use. Just because you live in the projects, you don't have to have a project mentality. She did this for all the kids, knowing that they were our neighbors. It was only recently that I found out that my Aunt Elizabeth, affectionately known as Aunt Puddin', was deeply involved in civil rights with Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and Reverend Jesse Jackson. Inspired by the lunch counter sit-ins at Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina, the efforts to integrate spread first to Virginia. While a senior in high school, my Aunt Lizzie, or Puddin', participated in sit-ins at Rose's Five and Dime store in Mid-City Portsmouth. They were ignored by the waitresses and endured taunts from white students. 4 months later, though, the whites-only policy was dropped. My aunt made a life of service to her neighbors through living King's wisdom that no one is free until we all are free. By integrating the lunch counters, all were freed from the institutional racism, the institutional burden of racism. In my life, I knew I was going to be in public service and graduated with a degree in political science. Through the grace of God, some lucky breaks, and hard work, I was hired over 30 years ago at Reed San Diego, the San Diego Public Library's adult literacy program. And I've worked to make a difference in my neighborhood with my neighbors. At the core, this program is about neighbors helping neighbors. I feel privileged to work in a job that I believe in, that I think is socially relevant, useful, and needed, and I get to see miracles happen every day. Growing the ability to read makes a powerful difference in the lives of San Diegans, one person at a time, one family member at a time, impacting the overall health of our community. The folks who show up asking for help are from every corner of our city. Folks who, for many reasons, did not get what they individually needed in their formal education, but managed with their own strengths to make a good life, yet still want the freedom and joy that comes with reading. Many people come because they want to read to their children, or they want to advance in their jobs. Some want to pass the citizenship test. Some want to get a driver's license. Some want to get their high school diploma, or simply read a book from cover to cover. I spend my day inviting, welcoming them in. I am humbled to have a chance to make a difference in my community. Jackie and I recently saw Gentleman's Agreement, the film classic by Elia Kazan. In the movie, Gregory Peck accepts the magazine's assignment to write about anti-Semitism. He struggled with how to do this from a new angle and decided to pretend that he was a Jew in order to live the experience rather than study the experience. Very little time passed when he began to sense the discomfort others had around him when he brought up that he was Jewish. He had asked his liberal fiancée not to give away what he was doing so that he could work on this assignment. But when it came time for her to introduce him to the family, she didn't want them to think he was Jewish. This caused tension in the relationship. She says to Phil, "You think I'm an anti-Semite." Phil responds, "I've come to see lots of nice people who hate it and deplore it and protest their own innocence, then help it along and wonder why it grows." He goes on to say that people who would never beat up a Jew, people who think anti-Semitism is far away in some dark place with low-class morons, that's the biggest discovery I've made. The good people, the nice people. It's a great movie that all of us liberals should rewatch. The whole story illustrates Dr. King's wisdom. In the end, we will not be remembered by the words of our enemies, but by the silence of our friends. As I watched the movie, I was struck by the intersectionality of the isms. I, as an African-American lesbian woman, have experienced the silence of good and otherwise nice people, including my own family, whose silence and absence in attending our wedding seared me at the time and continues to sear me. We all have room to examine our blind spots and silences. Today, we have the opportunity to really look at the consequences of our silence. Those times we don't speak up, we don't stop. Because the road is dangerous, we have very important things to do. I'm gonna have to say that one again. Today we have the opportunity to really look at the consequences of our silence. Those times when we don't speak up, we don't stop, because the road is dangerous and we have very important things to do. But it's not about us. It's about the person hurting, the person on the margins. It's about the seemingly invisible folks, the people who might hurt us, the person who is God on the side of the road. What will happen to our neighbor if we don't speak up, stop and risk? Is it foolish if we don't invite them in? Is it wise to stop on the road to Jericho? Dr. Martin Luther King calls us to this. Dr. King calls us to rise up tonight with greater readiness to move on in these powerful days, as Diane said, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. Thank you.